Deeper Dive, NFL Week 6, Sunday, October 13th. Dave Loughran, Ben Rasa, and the man, the myth, the legend, Alex Baker, Awesemo himself. Boys, don't all chime in at once, but how are we doing today?
Doing good, man. There's like this marathon going on outside here, so feeling a little bit bad about my lack of physical activity. But there are thousands of people running this marathon today, and only a handful of people win GPPs every week. So let's set our sights a little bit higher, people.
You are in an exclusive category, no question. Last time I was in Chicago, there was this massive anti-Trump rally, and I couldn't get across the street. So that's what I remember. But anyway, Ben, we've got some big news, and it may not seem like big news, but I just want to jump into everything quickly. Anything that you think needs to be highlighted while people make lineups throughout the show. But the Davian Howard news is actually kind of big when you consider this team is already decimated and really just tanking. They're terrible. And now, one of the top corners in the league is not expected to play, and Terry McLaurin won't be shadowed by him anymore.
Yeah, that came out of nowhere. Poor Dolphins. This was their one shining moment already behind the 8 ball today. So there's a lot of injury news to monitor, but that is one that I certainly wasn't even thinking about. And we saw that it definitely is a serious, serious boost to the Redskins passing attack.
The one shining moment.
I wanted to bet them today too, and now the line's moving the wrong way already.
So yeah, I saw that as well. Oh, wait, you wanted to bet the Dolphins?
Of course. What do you think I'm about?
I wanted to bet. I liked Washington quite a bit. New coach, inject a little bit of enthusiasm into these guys, establish the run game. If not for one game, I think Bill Callahan can make them look like they belong in this league. At the bottom of the league, but belonging in the league nonetheless. So, yeah, I actually like Washington here, but we're going to get into all of that, and we will start right now. We've got 10 games only on this main slate. Of course, Panthers and Bucks in action right now in London. And then you already had the Thursday, you got a Sunday night, a Monday night, which leaves us with 10. So let's just hop right into it. Baltimore and Cincinnati. This is another big piece of news. We were, waiting to hear what we would get throughout the week, Alex. But Marcus Brown is not going to play, which leaves us with guys like obviously Mark Andrews, but then you're talking about Willie Snead and Seth Roberts. This is one of the higher totals on the slate. It's come down a bit. It's still at 28.5. But yesterday, and I wrote this in the NFL Pivot. You can find it on awesemo.com. I mentioned it at length on Awesemo Radio and SiriusXM. Like, Mark Ingram was coming in at 4.8% ownership, and that was a spot that I was going to have ungodly amounts of in the event that held true and was like up until lock, he was still that far down. Same price basically as Fournette and Bell. But even before this news came out on Marcus Brown, Ingram's ownership has shot up to like 14%. So there's a lot of moving parts on this Baltimore team.
Yeah, I think that Brown being out makes an impact. I mean, this is a guy who averages 60 yards a game or more. Taking that out of the equation adds up to a lot more receiving yards for other guys. Mark Andrews should benefit. Willie Snead, now the wide receiver one on the team, he's in play. His price varies a lot based on what site you're playing on. So on Draftkings and Fantasydraft, Willie Snead is actually quite expensive, so I'd avoid him. But on Fanduel and Yahoo, he's like dirt cheap, so he makes a really nice play.
Yeah, Ben, what are your thoughts on Ingram? I just, spouted off quite a bit about him there. I was pretty passionate about it yesterday. It's hard to be as passionate about it now that you're seeing he's actually getting attention.
Yeah, there was a lot of people who noticed that with the ownership bump, and it makes sense because, Baltimore is kind of that type of team, and we know Ingram most likely to really get there. He's going to have to find the end zone probably even a couple of times if you're really looking for a top end performance. He's that kind of guy. But at the same time, you have the Ravens at home here, a double-digit favorite. if it's not Marquise Brown, which it's obviously not going to be, there's only limited options for them. We know Lamar can vulture with his own ground game, but it's hard not to think that Ingram has a massive share of the Ravens' success today.
And he has whenever the game script has been favorable or neutral, right? Like they got blown out by Cleveland. He saw less work in the second half. He didn't see anything in the fourth quarter in that blowout win against Miami. But in games that are favorable to them, unless it's just a flat blowout, he's going to see a lot of it of opportunities. What are your thoughts on? Would you pair him with Lamar here? There obviously is not that correlation in that he's going to be throwing to him a lot. But I guess what I'm asking is, Mark Andrews, and talk to me about the whole offense here. But Mark Andrews is obviously going to be one of the top options. We expect him to play full practice on Friday, but then really it's like Seth Roberts and not a lot of good players. Willie Snead, who Alex mentioned on DraftKings at least, is too expensive. But we still expect them to score points. They have the second highest implied total on the entire slate behind only the Chiefs. So I just think this is an awkward spot to try and evaluate.
Oh, it's definitely awkward because points are going to come from somewhere. But at the same time, to me, I'm keeping it pretty simple. I will have Ingram, on lineups kind of by himself. I think there's a real narrative where the Ravens just run it down their throat. And then I think Lamar to Mark Andrews is going to be a popular pairing. And I get that. He's a red zone target. We know Lamar likes to go to him. So that's really where I'm at. I don't see a ton of merit for reaching for the wide receivers on the Ravens. There's just too many other spots, even on a 10-game slate.
Okay. Yeah, what are your thoughts there, Alex? Just kind of on this entire situation. And, if you're doing game stacks on Cruncher and, you've got it set where you must play it with at least two wide receiver tight ends from a certain team or from every team. So you have the Lamar Jackson as the key in the group. What would you do to avoid this, or would you not avoid it and just let it pair him with, either Seth Roberts or Willie Snead when you're obviously going to have Mark Andrews in there as well? How would you approach this?
Yeah, I think that one issue with setting any automated rule is that you'll end up with some players in your lineups that might not be the ones you want. So, like, for example, Mark Ingram and Lamar Jackson don't have much correlation because they're not scoring points at the same time. I only have Mark Ingram projected for about 16 receiving yards. So on some teams, the running backs are more in play with the stacks, so it can make sense to consider them on other teams. Like Chris Thompson is one that comes to mind this week that is good to pair with Case Keenum. But I think Willie Snead and Mark Andrews are really the only guys I'd consider as far as receivers from the team. I guess Seth Roberts would be kind of a deep dart throw. He is actually the min price on DraftKings, so I think that's kind of playable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you. I like Ingram a lot. I just don't like him with Lamar Jackson. And truth be told, would anyone be surprised if, Lamar Jackson threw for 2 touchdowns and rushed for 1, and then Ingram had 100 yards and 2 scores? I mean, against this team, it wouldn't be the most surprising thing, but a lot of things would have to go right for that to happen. Ben, on the opposite side, Cincinnati, I've mentioned this throughout the week. Baltimore slot coverage has been terrible. They've coughed up monster numbers to Arizona, Fitzgerald and Kirk, to McCall Hardman and Watkins, and then, of course, Jarvis Landry absolutely obliterated them in the middle of the field. Now you've got Tyler Boyd, who's 6th in slot yards on the season among all receivers in the NFL. What are your thoughts on Boyd, on Auden Tate, on Joe Mixon? Go ahead.
So Boyd is one of the, he's one of the safer guys out there just because it seems like 10-plus targets is inevitable. When they're trailing, they need to look to him. If they're winning, it's probably because of him. So it's hard to imagine him not really having some success. And I do think everyone's catching up to this, but the Ravens defense is just not that good. The name makes it seem like they're good, but they're just not. And they can be run against, they can be thrown against. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that the Bengals have some success. Now, Joe Mixon, I mean, Laffy, this is, what do? I recommend Joe Mixon, then it doesn't work. That's
you never.
His offensive line is garbage. He had something going last week. He had 60 yards on that first drive. He ended with like 90-something. I still think
that was so deflating, Ben.
Yeah, disturbing. Very, very disturbing. That's the only way you could describe it. I think if you want to be aggressive in this game, you can look to a guy with Mixon. His price is kind of depressed across the industry, especially off last week where he kind of steamed a bit. I think it's an interesting play, but certainly not a priority for me.
Okay. Alex, thoughts on the Cincinnati Bengals?
I think it's reasonable to go here for some GPP flyers. Boyd makes a nice play because he has such a large volume. And Cincinnati, you got to project them to throw the ball a lot because they're going to be trailing in the game most likely. And then Auden Tate was a chalk play that failed last week. This week, not nearly as good a situation, and he's priced up. But he could be kind of like a really deep flyer where no one will have him.
Okay. Yeah, at that price, would you say? I guess he failed based on how insane the scores were.
If you didn't 10x, you failed last week somehow.
I tell you what, though, the guy that won, I think it was the slant, the $9 slant. I'm pretty sure he had like a 5 from somebody. I can't remember what it was. It doesn't mean he didn't fail. It just means that, Oh, well, he also had Amari Cooper, Aaron Jones, Will Fuller, Christian McCaffrey.
200 points. Yeah.
Oh,
300 points.
I think he had Darren Waller, who was just okay. Not actually, he wasn't good at all, if I recall correctly. So, crazier things have happened. But anyway, let's keep moving on here. We've got 10 games to discuss. Unless you guys have anything else there, I think we're good.
I think I got one more point here.
Go ahead.
I'm seeing in my model, I think Baltimore will run a lot more plays in this game than Cincinnati because Baltimore tends to sustain drives a lot, and their defense keeps the opponent off the field a lot. So I'm ending up higher on the Ravens and lower on the Bengals compared to most of the props I'm seeing out here.
Do you like their defense?
I think they're. I think that they're not projecting amazing for me because Andy Dalton, although he's not a great quarterback, he doesn't throw a ton of picks. But I think they are like a good defense. They tend to yield better results per play than other defenses. So not a great spot for Cincinnati by any means.
Fair enough. Hey, Ben, Cleveland, Seattle. I wish I could root for Cleveland. I just don't know if I can root for Baker Mayfield. That's the problem. And it's got nothing to do with Richard Sherman's fake news. But it does have everything to do with me just not being a huge fan of the fella. But it's tough not to talk about them today when you've got Odell Beckham at $6,800 on DraftKings, Jarvis Landry coming off one really great game and another one where he was okay based on what Mayfield did, and that was nothing. And then, of course, Nick Chubb here, who is always getting a lot of traction up against this Seattle team, expected to be a close game. What are you doing with the Brown side of the ball in a game right now that I don't see why it wouldn't be competitive? Right now, the Seahawks are 1-point road favorites, 46-point over-under. Go ahead.
This is a big one. Browns in super desperation mode again. Now they responded the first time against the Ravens a couple weeks ago. They need this game, though. I think they win this game at home. And if they do, I tried to buy on this last week. It did not work. Odell, to me, really is in a really nice spot. When you look at kind of how they got mauled by the Niners, he seems a little unhappy. The targets haven't been great, but at the same time, he just really hasn't been manufacturing them into big plays. We know the ceiling is still there. And then you look at the Seahawks defense. It's fine, but again, I think name recognition has people a little more afraid than they should be. This is a defense that yields points. We saw the Rams on Thursday. They had plenty of success moving the ball. And I think Cleveland at home in a game like this, they will find a way to put up enough points on the board and grab a win, and I think that starts with Odell.
Okay, I'm with you. I like him here a lot too. This is just a price that is also too low to overlook. And, one of the things is he's projected to get some ownership, but not an egregious amount. Like if I told you that, hey, in week 6, Odell Beckham if I told you this in week 1 or week 2, that Odell Beckham's going to be 6,800 a couple weeks from now, you'd think he'd be the highest owned player on the slate.
And that's a situation where the recency bias, I get it, but I'm not sure that there is a reason. If there's something internally or there's a problem with Odell, I don't see that. I think he's just as likely to explode as he always is. It's just the public is not there based on him failing in some of these spots.
I agree. How do you feel about him, Alex?
I like him. I think that, man, the public is really down on him. Someone tweeted at me earlier today that they were. Let me try and find this tweet. I have to choose between Larry Fitzgerald and Odell Beckham in my flex, leaning towards Fitz.
Oh my God, dude! You know what's funny? I said that's so funny you bring that up. I did like a whole segment last night on how these people get so discouraged and they're pulling their hair out because the guy they drafted in the first round isn't putting up big numbers. So then they go and they play Curtis Samuel over Odell Beckham. And then they're super pissed when Beckham finally has that monster game and Samuel finishes with 7 fantasy points. It happens like clockwork.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the being too quick to react is a big mistake, and we're seeing that sports books really are giving the Browns a lot of credit, putting them as a 1-point dog versus Seattle. I think that that really shows. I mean, Seattle's a pretty solid team, and they're right up there with them, and not the highest team total of the week at 23, but that means they should be putting up some points, and passing is probably how they're going to do it.
Okay. Yeah, Ben, do you, on the opposite side of this game, think that guys like Lockett are in a good spot? Denzel Ward expected back, so we can talk about that. Chris Carson, though, he fumbled he had 3 lost fumbles in his first 3 games. Brutal. But Pete Carroll went right back to him. He's now seen 49 carries and 6 targets over his last 2 games alone. They're not getting away from Carson here. And we're finding that even though he returned last week, Rashad Penny is nothing more than a backup to spell Chris Carson. And CJ Prosise, despite getting a few opportunities in that fumble game against the Saints, has been relegated back to a nobody.
There's no doubt that he had basically 30 touches last week. And when you got that kind of volume, you need to be noticed. I don't like, I'm taking kind of a macro view of this game. I don't like the spot for Seattle in general. I think flying across the country for an early game against a desperate team is not a good spot. I wouldn't be stunned to see them not play well. That doesn't mean guys like Lockett and Carson can't get there and can't, hold it together. I'm not saying the Browns are going to shut them out.
It's a good point that you make, for sure. And we've seen that traveling from west to east does seem to have an impact.
Definitely. Now, to speak to both sides of it, they did play Thursday, and I think that helps.
Yeah.
But I have some interest in the Browns defense, just to kind of show you where I'm at as an against-the-grain play here. So Lockett, he's unbelievable. The way that Russell Wilson is playing, he gets these guys in positions, and somehow they are getting it done. So I may look to them, but nothing more besides kind of a price-dependent spot. I think I'm way more apt to go to the Browns side of the ball.
Interesting. Okay. I don't disagree with you. However, I do think that this is probably a spot where, just because of volume and price, Carson is viable again. When it comes to volume, I'm willing to, consider guys just knowing that they have the upside to see 25 touches. That always stands out to me. What are you doing with Seattle, Alex?
I think that Tyler Lockett makes a nice play. He has been having a great season so far. It's a spot where Seattle is playing in a competitive game, so that makes me a little bit more bullish on the passing attack, because we see that whenever Seattle's ahead by a lot, they're just running the ball nonstop. So I think that Lockett makes a nice play. Disley, the hype is kind of faded to some extent. He's a little bit more expensive now, but still a reasonable play. And then Carson, it looks like his price is down a little bit. With Rashad Penny back, he's not going to be quite as good a spot as he was a couple weeks ago, but still seeing a lot of work.
Okay. You guys have anything else to add from either side of this game before we move on?
Not really. If Will Disley kills me, I'll be very tilted, but that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm finding myself, when punching lineups, essentially just getting the top 4 guys this week. Well, I guess you could throw in 5, but that I don't have a ton. But like Kelce, Kittle, Hooper, Andrews are the ones that I'm getting the most of. Since I just brought it up, Ben, are there any cheap tight ends that you like?
I think that Gerald Everett, if the Rams kind of transform their offense a bit, depending on the injuries, he's shown he can get it done, but the volume is not as secure as you might think.
It's also worrying, Alex, that George Kittle, now they're saying that he will play, but there's concern about whether he'll be able to finish the contest, according to Adam Schefter. Like, that is not encouraging.
Yeah, I've been getting a lot of questions from subscribers about George Kittle's groin this morning. Honestly, thinking about another man's groin is pretty low on my mind, on my list, but that is concerning.
Gotta be done, man.
Yeah, that's true.
This is the burden you carry.
That's right, and the reports were pretty discouraging, so I think there are some red flags there.
Is it enough for you to get away from him?
Probably not. I mean, he's in a great spot. I think that the fact that it wasn't a game time decision, they knew he was going to play before the day even started. That's encouraging. And guys go out there and play injured every single week in the NFL. It's hard to really, just because we know about this one injury, I mean, there's probably 5 other guys that we don't know about that are in the same spot. Agreed.
Yeah, the only thing that I consider is certain injuries are definitely affect players more than others, and I worry that this could be one of those. But you know what? I think you just have to roll with it. I will say though, there are plenty of alternatives at the top there if you didn't feel confident in Kittle. Alex, sticking with you, Jacksonville, New Orleans. No Drew Brees again. I think this matchup's actually really interesting for a couple of reasons. First, is DJ Shark going to see a ton of Marshawn Lattimore? That's interesting. Or should we expect it to be like Chris Conley? Pro Football Focus has it. Let's see if it's updated. Sometimes they have Shark against Apple, but he runs 50% of his routes on the right side of the field, and Eli Apple's been on the left side most of the time. Lattimore has covered 70. What is that? How many from the right side? A lot from the right side. But I'm just curious to know where you're at. Yes, 71% from the right side. Where you're at, starting with Jacksonville on this matchup for the receivers, and then we can of course talk Fournette.
I think this one is pretty good for fantasy because Jacksonville, I mean, they're actually favored in this game for the first time in a few weeks, with Gardner Minshew kind of getting some cred. And he's been good. I think they've been averaging more than 7 yards per pass this year. So that means there's some production to spread around. James O'Shaughnessy, their tight end, is on the injured reserve now. So that opens up some targets for some other guys. So I like Chark. D.D. Westbrook, he's kind of like the consensus contrarian play of the week. And
it sounds very contrarian now, doesn't it?
No, yeah. Exactly. And I think
I do like him though, I'm not gonna lie.
He hasn't been that efficient with his targets so far in the NFL. Only about 10.5 yards per catch, a little bit more than 60% catch rate. So this isn't a guy that really stands out from a statistics standpoint. But I don't hate it. I mean, the thing I don't like about him is on DraftKings, he's 5,100, on Fantasydraft 10.8. That's a little bit higher than I'd like. I think he's a better play on FanDuel, where he's 5,400.
Do you like Shark?
Shark is even more expensive, but I have him as a little bit of a better play. But still, I probably am not getting there.
Ben, what are your thoughts quickly on the receiving corps for Jacksonville, and then feel free to transition into Fournette, who, unsurprisingly, getting ownership again. His price tag still isn't reflecting his volume or his production, and now you're seeing him, up around 25%.
Yeah, it's hard not to like it. As Alex talked about, the Jags at home favored in this game, and it's a pretty good spot. So, D.D. Westbrook, what can I say? I do like him a bit. He's coming out of the slot. Hasn't really found the end zone much. He scored in that week 1, but we haven't seen anything. The volume's been there. So if he can put it together, I think there's some merit there. Now, Shark is more of a boom bust. We'll see if Lattimore shadows him or something along those lines. But all in all, I do think that Jacksonville, especially if they're winning this game, Fournette has no competition in that backfield. They will lean on him heavily, 25, 30 touches style. And at this price, you can really justify it because you don't have to be that efficient. You find the end zone and you're getting that type of volume. It's pretty hard not to get there.
Right. And it does mitigate what has been a pretty difficult matchup. The Saints have done a good job of slowing down opposing running backs, a few notable spots. Like Elliott was held to 35 yards on 18 carries. Carson, 52 yards on 15. Gurley, 63 on 16. Like, they have done a very good job of limiting opposing running backs for the most part. Does the volume for Fournette mitigate any concern of a matchup at all?
Man, for me it does, because the transition for him now getting these dump-off passes, those 5-6, it's massive. Because even in bad game scripts, or even if they are stifling him, they can get him the ball in other ways. And in a game like this, where it should be a close competitive game, I think that Fournette is going to have all the opportunities. Now, if he doesn't materialize, I'm willing to live with that more often than not. If my guy gets 25, 30 touches, I'll live with the outcome pretty much any time.
Yeah, no question. And I should add, I agree with you 100%. This is why I've dubbed him the poor man's McCaffrey, not because he's as talented, but because he's actually getting like 6-7 targets a game. But I think it's very important to consider, just because a running back is getting some of these opportunities in the passing game, does not mean that you can go out and pair him with Minshew now. Like, if you want to, sure, Ben, but we're seeing like 5 for 25, 6 for 24. It's strictly a PPR thing, in my opinion.
Oh, it's just a floor booster in my eyes.
Right.
I don't see any reason to do that. If you're going to use Minshew, and I don't have a ton of interest there, I think you have to take a stab with his outside guys and hope that he can start really slinging it and go that route.
Agreed. What about you, Alex? Fournette?
I think Fournette's probably one of the top plays of the week given his salary. It just hasn't gone up quite enough to reflect his workload, and he's been producing. I mean, he's scored the 4th most fantasy points per game on average over the course of the year, but his price doesn't reflect that. He's the 6th most expensive running back on Draftkings where I'm looking, and this spot is better than the average spot for Jacksonville, being a favorite versus New Orleans. So I think that he makes a lot of sense. I like him a lot. I don't love him as much as the days where he was a lot lower owned, because people have kind of figured out that when you get all the volume, that's like really a great situation in fantasy. So I think the public is kind of catching on, but I'm still going to be rolling with him. Yeah,
me too. There's another guy we'll talk about whose obvious volume plays into him being popular today. But on the other side, Alex, you've got the New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara had tweaked his ankle in practice, but he's expected to play. So no Latavius Murray shares here. He would be overwhelming chalk. The interesting thing, though, is Ben mentioned about Baltimore how the name recognition, people associate them with being a very good defense. Well, the Jacksonville Jaguars the same way, but they're ranked 32nd in run defense DVOA this season, according to Football Outsiders. According to Pro Football Focus, their defensive grade is bottom 6th in the league. So that has been a key area of weakness for them. Even with a guy like Ramsey being able to to return. Is Ramsey confirmed active?
I haven't seen anything, but I think
it honestly doesn't even matter. I guess what I'm saying, Alex, is this is actually a very good matchup on the ground for Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, I have to go back and correct my statement about Baltimore, because I see they're giving up a lot of yards this year. I use a rolling average of the last season and this season, weighting this season a little bit more heavily. Because you do see some kind of outlier stats in the first few weeks. Like, for example, Baltimore played Kansas City, who were terrific against their defense, but that doesn't mean you can't weight that the same way as you'd weight just an average team. So Jacksonville, though, so they played the Panthers, the Texans, the Chiefs. So they played some good teams and some bad teams with the Titans and Broncos. So I think basically I have them rated as about an average team with a little bit of boost to the running potential. So I like that for Alvin Kamara. He is priced up a lot higher than some of the other guys in that tier of player with Fournette and Bell. So I'm not landing on him as much, but I suppose his ownership might be mitigated by the injury status. So I think that maybe he'll go a little bit under the radar this week.
Ben, what about you?
So Kamara is an interesting guy just because the way he plays, I actually like when he's overpriced because I think the sacrifice of ownership is worth it because when he gets going, he can get there on like 12 touches.
For sure.
And the volume he's been getting with Bridgewater is substantial. In a game where they might be trailing, it's substantial. Now, he's only scored in one game against Seattle, and that's the game he exploded, which makes sense. Other than that, he's really been just doing it on pure efficiency and volume. I'm willing to go there if the ownership mitigates it. I think Alex talked about, I don't love the spot compared to some of the other guys, but with a guy like Kamara in particular, I like to see him priced at the premium because the way he plays, his ceiling is so high, it doesn't really matter what his price is.
Right. What are your thoughts on Michael Thomas here?
So I'm not, he had the messed up price last week, exploded. I'm not really there. There's so many other receivers in other games that I'm willing to go to. I think if the Jaguars are going to resemble maybe they're not as stout as they formerly were, but I think the secondary is still more apt to kind of give problems than maybe what Kamara would say.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. There are a lot of wide receivers in very appealing spots today. So I think that's a little bit more difficult. Ben, on the rest of this game, is there anything else you want to talk about? Tight ends, any players that we haven't gotten to yet?
Not really. I looked at Jared Cook. I think if you're maybe in a jam, you could potentially. But as you talked about, I tried to pay up at tight end as much as possible this week.
Okay. Did you have any interest in anyone else here, Alex?
No.
Okay. Kansas City, Houston. Ben, let me stay with you here. Highest total on the slate. You got a 54.5 point over under, 29 implied total for Kansas City, 25.5 for the Houston Texans. And this game opened at 6.5 points. Their Chiefs being 6.5 point favorites. They're 3.5 point favorites now. So first of all, we know Sammy Watkins isn't expected to play, but what does this tell you about the rest of this game?
Oh boy, yeah, this is a wild one. The toughest game for me to break down, to be honest. We got a lot of moving parts. Sammy Watkins is out. Tyreek Hill, game time decision. If he plays, what does his ownership look like, and is he going to be working with a full snap count? Those are things I obviously would like to know. Mahomes has been, relative to Mahomes, pretty disappointing. The Colts game wasn't on the main slate, but that was not good. He did not score against the Lions, even though they got it done. So I don't know what to make of the Chiefs here. Travis Kelce, premier tight end, as he always is, not looking to the backs. So I always want to get exposure to a high-octane offense like this, especially at home. I'm just not sure, outside of Travis Kelce, where I feel comfortable allocating shares.
Yeah. Do you the thing, and you just mentioned it, like, what is going to happen with Tyreek Hill? I think, one positive thing, though, is that even if he is somewhat limited and it turns out that, you run him out there anyway, you're rolling the dice and he's a bit limited, Tyreek Hill really only needs to do, he doesn't need to play 97% of snaps to have a huge impact. Now, obviously his floor is lower in a case like that, but I definitely think that it's not crazy if you wanted to consider him.
No, I mean, and I'll pass it right back, but I just mentioned Kamara. That's the Tyreek Hill formula. Like, Tyreek Hill is the number one guy who you can get there with 3 targets. It's not ideal because if it doesn't connect, you're probably taking a 0.8x return. but that guy is the biggest boom bust we've always seen. So even if he's somewhat limited, it's not ideal, but it doesn't mean that he can't explode.
Absolutely. Yeah. What are your thoughts here on this this Kansas City team, seeing that the line dropped by 3 points or moved 3 points in favor of Houston, and we expect Hill to play. We don't expect Watkins to play, Alex.
I think this is an amazing game, and I don't think anyone is thinking this isn't the game of the week. Is undisputed. In my top stacks tool, I calculate the probability that each team will have the best passing stack of the week. There are 10 games on the main slate, and the probability is 30% that one of these two teams will be the best of the week. So that's 3 times as much as average for the slate. And I mean, this is going to be a great game. I really like Tyreek Hill coming back from the clavicle injury. I feel like I read up a little bit on the injury this morning. It looked like he had a dislocated muscle near the collarbone. So that really isn't the type of injury where I'd be concerned about him playing like half a game, because I don't really know, unless he has the ball, how much like that injury will really like slow him down. So I'm not as worried about it. I think he's a great play. And then Kelce, I also think, is amazing. There are some other great tight ends this week, but he's going to be near the top of my list.
Yeah, I really like him a lot as well. What about Houston? I've said this throughout the week, but if you missed any of the shows, I'll just mention it quickly again. Frank Reich really, laid out a blueprint on how to beat this Kansas City team. Now, they were obviously down key players. I'm not ignoring that at all. But there's no doubt that his ability to run the ball and run it well and keep the ball out of Mahomes' hands against a defense that has been hit by injuries. They just lost another defensive tackle for the season, and their run defense was already ranked in the bottom 3 in nearly every single category, whether it's run defense, DVOA, whether it's yards per attempt, whether it's yards per game. It's been brutal. Their ability to stop the run has not been there. And we even saw Detroit almost beat them with that very similar formula, rushing for 190 yards.
Yeah, I think Kansas City does a really bad job at allowing their opponents to sustain drives at a far higher rate than average. So I do like that. That usually gives their opponents more plays per game. Compared to what you might expect if you just look at who's favored in the game. So I think that Houston is in a great spot, especially their passing game, because they should have to pass the ball and put up a lot of points to win this game. So I like Hopkins and Fuller. Kenny Stills is not expected to be active, so that kind of puts Kiki Kuti as the wide receiver 3. But he hasn't really been on the field enough of any particular game this season to justify in fantasy. So I'm just sticking to those 2 guys.
Okay. Ben, I'll probably be rolling the dice on some Carlos Hyde here. I think if they are going to, if it gets out of hand and Mahomes throws 3 early touchdowns, then, forget about it. But I also think that if this game is competitive, Hyde's seen 20-plus carries in 2 of his last 4 games. And they might look to try and run it down Kansas City's throat. But all in all, this is a very interesting game from both sides. How are you approaching this Houston Texans?
So, yeah, this is a dicey one. I'll say this. Bill O'Brien is watching, and I doubt that he is, because he's probably got some things going on. He should run Carlos Hyde 30 times today.
Right.
The formula, if you stack this game, you should hope that the Chiefs win, and you should hope that they're leading early, because the formula should be for the Texans to slow the game, lean on Carlos Hyde, and let this go under the total and try to escape. If you get into a shootout, which Kansas City will be happy to do at home, A, it's going to be great for fantasy, and B, it's going to be bad for the Texans, in my opinion. So I think there's 2 schools to it. If you fade the game, you definitely hope that they try to take the air out of the ball with a guy like Carlos Hyde. If you think that the Chiefs can get up early or that it opens up a bit, then certainly DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, and Deshaun Watson in the passing attack. They have the weapons to keep up, but I really think there is an avenue where the Texans control it on the ground.
I'm with you, man. And I think we both kind of said it. it could go completely off the rails.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, it could. Right, exactly. Like it could go completely opposite of what we were hoping for. But you could also see a scenario where they do try and emulate what Frank Reich did, what the Lions did, and try and, like you said, escape with a win, basically. So, yeah, it's a very interesting spot to me. Do you guys want to talk about anything else from this game, just because it is really the fantasy game of the week, so to speak?
I'll throw out the idea that, we talk so much about game stacking, but game fade is just as kind of reasonable concept. So if everyone is playing this game, it might make sense to just fade it or take a one-off, like you're saying. Maybe Hyde runs the ball a lot and slows down the game, and he would have a good individual performance, but that would really restrict the fantasy performance of anyone else in the game.
All right. Interesting take for sure. Alex, let's go back to you. Miami and Washington. Washington Redskins. You know a team is terrible when they're dogs at home against the Washington Redskins. That's remarkable. I don't even know how that happens, but here we are. And this game has a 42-point over-under. It's actually not the lowest on the slate. It's the second lowest. Redskins 23.3 implied total, 18.8 for the Miami Dolphins. Skins are now 4.5-point favorites at home. Call me crazy, but I think there's a little juice here with Bill Callahan, if only for a game, one game. I mean, they look to run the ball. Adrian Peterson's media time was very telling in that it seems like he likes Callahan more because he's actually going to use him. But now Davian Howard, as we mentioned at the top of the show, not expected to play. Terry McLaurin could have some appeal. Hell, even guys like Paul Richardson. I don't know. This to me is a very fascinating spot for the Redskins. And Chris Thompson, of course, is another guy. As bad as a team this is, Alex, the Dolphins are worse on defense.
Definitely. I think this is kind of a game where if you're casual fantasy season-long player, you're not going to see much in this game, but as DFS players, when we get a competitive game like this, I think there is a lot of value. Miami projected to do significantly better than they have been doing so far, and also Washington. So I think that that adds fantasy value to pretty much everyone on the teams. And some guys I'm looking at in particular are the running backs from Washington. The new coach has said they really want to establish the run, so that would kind of be an Adrian Peterson smash spot. He's cheap. Chris Thompson, probably the better fantasy player just because of how many looks he's getting in the receiving game. So I'm looking at him as well.
Okay. Ben, what are your thoughts here on the Redskins? Both phases of the offense.
Yeah, they're bad team, but McLaurin is certainly now. That was the biggest news that came out to me this morning because it came out of nowhere. Xavier Howard. Not that he had been. Truth be told, he got whipped by a couple of real good receivers.
Amari Cooper trashed them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely smoked them. But at the same time, this is a rookie wide receiver. It's a big boost to him. So I think you can look there. Chris Thompson, again, he's, Alex mentioned this earlier. He's basically a wide receiver at this point, the way they kind of utilize him. If you were going to use, I have no interest in using Keenum. But I may look to take a player here or there, specifically McLaurin, because I think the Redskins should have no problem moving the ball, despite I can make some points about Miami. They're coming off the bye. They are at home. We'll see what they're made of today.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Miami then. How do you feel about, I'm sure Kenyon Drake was at least popping up on your radar a couple of times. Preston Williams, Devontae Parker. But let's start, of course, with your boy, Kenyon Drake.
So, again, say what you will about Miami, but they've played New England, Baltimore, the Cowboys, and the Chargers. Now they're off a bye against the Redskins. It's just a different situation, and they have not scored in the second half, which is insane. These are the type of things that should be changing today against the Redskins. They should, even if they lose this game, it should be competitive. If they get blown out here and they can't manufacture anything, then they were permanently shelved. But this is a spot where I think you can look to their weapons, specifically Drake, Preston Williams on the outside. Rosen's done his job. They dropped the ball a lot. It's a ridiculous percentage right now. But I do think that there is some interest in looking at these two bad teams. The defenses are equally awful, and there's going to be some points put up in this game. So everyone is down on the Dolphins, rightfully so. But against an opponent like this, if they can find the end zone a couple of times, guys like Drake, guys like Preston Williams have some merit.
For sure. By the way, Tyreek Hill, active, officially going to play. That's good. And I want to go to you, Alex, but let me just say quickly, just thinking about this. When you're looking at where players line up, I'm going backwards for a second. Seth Roberts is playing, I think, like almost at 80. How many? Out of the slot. What, 6% out of the slot? What I was going to point out is figure out where it is that Brown is lining up most and try and get an idea of which one of these guys makes the most sense to not get the same snaps as he usually does, but get more in place of Marquise Brown. So, it might be Boykin, something worth looking back into, but I don't want to go backwards too much here because we want to talk about the Dolphins, Alex. What are you doing here?
So I think there is some fantasy value here. Jakeem Grant is out this week. He's their third wide receiver. Albert Wilson is back, but he's questionable. I'm expecting him to play. Albert Wilson, I'm a little bit hesitant. He's probably their best player, but I'm not sure he'll see the field quite enough in his first game back from 5 games injured. So I'm a little hesitant to go there, but he has a lot of talent. Preston Williams would probably be my go-to receiver, but he isn't extremely cheap. So I mean, it's not a play I love. If he was the minimum, he'd be better. But Kenyon Drake is probably their best fantasy option, which isn't that great. I mean, this is still a team we project for 19 points. So I'm not super high on them. I think Miami might be getting a little bit too cute.
Okay. Let's talk about the next game here on the schedule. We've got, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 5 to go. Making decent timing. But first, let me tell you the sponsor of the NFL Deeper Dive is Fantasydraft.com. They are the only rake-free daily fantasy site, and they're bringing that fire again with a $500,000 guaranteed rake-free contest, the Hooters main event. It's the largest and only rake-free contest of its kind that you'll find for Week 6. And remember, only on Fantasy Draft are 100% of entry fees paid to the contest winners. Sign up at fantasydraft.com with referral code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. You'll get a 7-day free trial membership. So, again, Hooters main event, $500,000, largest contest of its kind for Week 6 because it is rake-free. 100% of entry fees are paid to you, the player. Referral code AWESEMO will get you a 7-day free trial membership, fantasydraft.com. Check them out today, sponsor of the Deeper Dive. All right, fellas, let's keep it moving here. Ben, Philly, Minnesota. Not exactly a game that's loaded with fantasy riches, but the Eagles' secondary has struggled mightily. Their run defense has been very, very good. On the other side, Minnesota's defense has played well pretty much across the board, and they are 3.5-point favorites here against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, it's a big game in the NFC, and it'll be very telling because Cousins is a polarizing play this week. I think a lot of people like him, and I see that. I guess they were forced to kind of open it up a bit against the Giants last week, and he looked good. So we'll see what they can do. Now, this is a team they should, regardless of all the talk, they should have opened it up against the Eagles regardless because Dalvin Cook is going to have a tough sledding against this front seven, and the secondary against the Eagles is where you can attack. So Cousins needs to make plays. Thielen, the obvious choice. I don't know I'll be honest, I do not know what to do with Diggs. I still think that ceiling game is there, but he really has slid back. To me, it used to be 1A and 1B, and it is just not that anymore. So I've certainly looked at Thielen as one of those, upper mid-range wide receivers across the board. Other than that, though, it's not a game that I love. I actually have some Vikings defense.
Okay, yeah, I have a little bit too. I think, if there was an opportunity for Diggs to explode, it would be against a team that their corners get crushed on double moves. They can't cover him downfield. We saw Calvin Ridley do it. We saw Terry McLaurin do it. the only reason we didn't see it last week was because Luke Falk's performance was one of the worst I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I'm serious. That was just absolutely dreadful. But Alex, talk to me about this Vikings side first.
Man, Kirk Cousins has only averaged 25 passing attempts per game this season. I mean, that's a little bit fluky. I think he'll have more on average, but that just completely kills the real value of any of the receiving plays on the team. So I don't have these guys rated very highly, honestly. I can't really see myself having a lot of the Minnesota Vikings receiving core. Dalvin Cook is in a good spot, but he's pretty much the most expensive player in fantasy these days somehow. So I'm not there either. I think that this game will be kind of a slog, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of fantasy value in it.
Okay. I think this spot for Diggs is actually, outside of Chicago, the toughest matchup he's drawn all season, just because of this run defense for the Eagles. But Ben, you mentioned it. They should be able to open it up through the air. I don't know if they will, but if there was ever an opportunity to do it, it would be against an Eagles team that it was hemorrhaging yards and fantasy points to opposing wide receivers before the New York Jets came to the link.
You just have to open it up here. I don't know how you don't. At home, Cousins, like I said, they were already incentivized to do that because of, what's been going on with Thielen and Diggs kind of being upset. But this is just in terms of matchup. Why would you not against a funnel pass defense like this? So I'm willing to go there in certain spots. It's a pretty simple run back with someone like Ertz in my mind if you wanted to get some exposure to the game. But more often than not, it doesn't strike me as a super back and forth. These are two solid defenses. The one glaring inefficiency would be the Eagles secondary.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for me, this would probably be more of a, Diggs one-off or Thielen one-off than a full-out stack for me. Because, like you said, it is an obvious choice running back with, Ertz, but you don't have many options there. It's like him or Alshon, who hasn't really been involved much outside of unless he's in the red zone. So, yeah, I think for me, more of a one-off, and then I'd take it from there. But, Alex, do you have any interest in the Eagles side of the ball?
I'm more interested in the Eagles side. I think that Darren Sproles being out is a factor because Miles Sanders, Howard, and Sproles were kind of three-man rotation. Now I expect Sanders to step in and get a lot of the third downs. And that kind of elevates him to being a fantasy play. And Howard, he's been kind of like the guy that's been doing pretty well in fantasy, but he doesn't have that much upside, especially versus a tough team where they're only projected to score 20 points since he has to do it all by rushing touchdowns. The other guys, Alshon Jeffrey and Zach Ertz, I think they're pretty good plays. Ertz has seen his price fall a lot, but he's still getting the targets. He just doesn't put it together for fantasy points. Jeffrey, he's been on the field almost every snap. He's been getting the targets. Deshaun Jackson is out still, so I think that he makes a nice play that is going to be very low this week.
Okay. Ben, anything else to add on the Eagles?
No, not really. Like I said, I think Ertz is one of those top-end tight end plays, but I'm not looking to target in Minnesota in a game. I think that the Vikings they're favored to win this game. It's a tough task to think that the Eagles really put up a ton of points.
Okay. Sticking with you then to the Atlanta-Arizona game. This one's actually pretty amazing that you have Atlanta playing so poorly this season, and because Arizona themselves is hardly an impressive team, they are dogs at home. But this line is, 2.5 points in favor of the Falcons. So it's nothing crazy. And the over-under has come up from 49 to 52, Ben. Falcons with a 27-3 implied total, 24-8 for the Cardinals. The only disappointment here is that Christian Kirk isn't expected to play, because now if you're stacking this and hoping to get Kyler Murray as your top option, that means you're going to have to play either pair David Johnson with him or Keyshawn Johnson or something like that.
This is, we talked about the Chiefs and the Texans, but this is a massive potential monster game for fantasy purposes. Yeah. We know how fast the Cardinals play. Both these teams are just garbage. Can't stop anyone. It reminds me a little of what we saw last week with Cincinnati and the Cardinals. And although that wasn't perfect, they kicked like 7 field goals. So take it for what it is. The potential is there. I'm going to be overweight on this game. It's not as simple as I thought it would be, though, just because I like the game. I had some trouble finding, correlations that I really liked, because you have Kyler Murray, who you can use him as a standalone. He had 90 yards rushing and a touchdown on the ground last week. If you want to pair him up, David Johnson's a little dicey right now. He's going to play, but how much work will he see? Is Edmonds going to really continue to get a lot, or is it going to be more of DJ being a bell cow? And then you have Fitz, certainly the premier wide receiver target. But other than that, it's not as easy as I thought it would be with this Cardinals attack, even though I like them as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, it's reasonable enough to me. It's tough to get there a little bit. Kyler Murray basically has to be paired with Johnson. And even though Johnson is going to play, I'm a little bit worried about what we see here in terms of usage. What are you doing with this game, both sides of it, Alex?
So I think this is probably the matchup of the week as far as DFS, because Houston, Kansas City is a great game, but these guys are all well-known fantasy commodities, so they're expensive. But this matchup versus Arizona and Atlanta, much better than average for both teams, and especially for Atlanta because Arizona plays at such a high pace this year. On the Arizona side, I think Christian Kirk being out opens it up a little bit for Larry Fitzgerald to get more targets. He's really the only option in the passing game that meets the threshold of fantasy points that I'm looking for. Given they go 4 wide so much, Keyshawn Johnson, Damiere Byrd, if he's active, Trent Sherfield should all split the remaining targets to some extent. David Johnson, he was pretty banged up last week, but he played. He got 17 rushing attempts, played about 2/3 of the game. So I think that the reason Edmonds saw a lot of work is because Johnson got his kind of quota for the rushing attempts, and they put in Edmonds to keep Johnson's work down. But Arizona doesn't really run the ball quite enough for that to be a huge concern for him to not play most of the game. So I think DJ may be a little bit underrated if people are just going off the box score from last week.
Yeah, I would love him here, and if Johnson was out, I would love Chase Edmonds. I'm just a little bit concerned about what we're going to see in terms of usage, but I guess that's a risk worth taking. When it comes to Matt Ryan and Austin Hooper and Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu and Calvin Ridley and Devonta Freeman, what are you doing here, Alex?
Just playing them all, preferably not on the same lineup, but I think Atlanta, they pass the ball a lot more than your average team. They probably won't pass it quite as much as normal because they are favored in this game. But still, the pace of play should mean they run a lot of plays. And I think that all these guys that you mentioned are all getting enough work to be fantasy relevant.
All right. Yeah, Ben, Atlanta for you? Talk to me about a team that has, unfortunately, many, many viable options who each week we really don't know what we're going to get.
No, the best correlation I have is when I play Calvin Ridley, he disappears, and when I don't, he scores many touchdowns. The guy is out of control. I think you really just kind of have to separate it with each individual team because, as Alex mentioned, you can make a real case for every single weapon on Atlanta. You just want to make sure what you're fitting, what fits in the right lineup for you. We know Austin Hooper has the best matchup out there. It's going to be popular. We know Ridley is more that boom bust. Julio's the best player. Freeman's, he's certainly going to try to get some on the ground. And Matt Ryan's going to be throwing it all over. So I'm going to try to attack this game and just really match up certain pairings and hope that one of them is that right combo.
Yeah. And that's really all you can do, right?
Yeah,
Austin Hooper has a really great matchup here against Arizona, a team that's been gutted by opposing tight ends. I like that. And that's a pretty big deal too. Patrick Peterson is serving the last of his 6-game suspension. It's a pretty big deal when you consider he's played pretty well against Julio over the years and is one of the best, cover corners in the league.
Oh yeah, I mean I don't think that they can stop the Falcons.
No, not at all.
No, and they play fast. It has all the makings of what you want. Now they're bad teams, and bad teams do stupid things. So it's not like it's foolproof, but at the same time, it's hard not to look to this in some capacity.
For sure. Do you want to add anything, Alex, before we move on?
I think that Devonta Freeman has been kind of off to a slow start, but Atlanta being favored in this game for the first time this year, I believe. He makes a really nice play, kind of standing out from the rest of the guys to me.
All right, talk to me about the Rams in San Francisco. But before you do, awesemo.com/join is where you can go to get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus subscription, including the ownership projections, player projections, all of our premium articles, lineup builders, the top stack tool, and so much more, including the Fantasy Cruncher add-on. We even have some preseason content for NBA behind paywall done by Fast Eddie Fear. And pretty much any sport that you want premium content for, we've got you covered. Use the sign-up code DEEPERDIVE, all one word, when you go to awesemo.com/join, and you'll get 50% off your first month of all access monthly membership. Also, if you just wanted to dip your feet in and see what is behind the curtain, $3.95 per week for our Express package. Check all of that out at awesemo.com/join. We've got videos basically showing you what everything is, so you don't jump in blind. You'll know exactly what you're paying for, what it does, and why it does it. So use the sign-up code DEEPERDIVE, all one word. When you do it, you get 50% off your first month. And say what's up in our premium Slack chat when you do, and we'll be happy to welcome you to the Awesemo family. All right. LA Rams, San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to ask you straight up, Alex, yes or no, is Malcolm Brown bad chalk?
Man, you're really putting me to the test here.
Well, who is that, man? Yeah.
I'd say he's bad chalk because there are just alternatives that are lower owned that are just as good. So
Totally agree.
Yeah, a couple guys I like more are Miles Sanders and Chris Thompson. The problem with Malcolm Brown, I mean, I think he's in a pretty good spot, like, let's be honest, but it's a tough matchup versus San Francisco. This guy, the Rams don't target the running backs very much this year at all, as far as a rate when they're running a route. And also Darrell Henderson is more of the pass-catching back, from what I understand. So I think that the potential of Malcolm Brown is pretty limited, and the worst part about it all is he's just not even that cheap.
Right.
He's 4,300 on Draftkings, 7,800 on Fantasydraft. So not the minimum. On Fanduel and Yahoo, he's pretty close to the minimum, so he makes a better play on those sites relative to Draftkings and Fantasydraft.
Yeah, Ben, we were doing a segment yesterday looking at value running backs, and from the SiriusXM Fantasy handle, we ran a poll, who will be the best value running back this week, and Malcolm Brown came back at like 55%. So, I mean, people really like this guy, but I don't know. I'm not saying he can't have a good game, but the Rams are running the ball way less than they were last season, about 6 fewer times per game. Their offense, their run blocking hasn't been as good as you would expect, and this is a tough matchup against what Football Outsiders has as the 5th best run defense. What are you thinking about Malcolm Brown?
It's tricky, because there's a real case to make that there's a lot of avenues where he can fail. Maybe it's not the workload that we anticipate. Maybe the Niners are just that good. We just don't know right now. They look great. I'm not on that train just yet, but at the same time, Alex mentioned, we'll see what Henderson's role is, and Malcolm Brown is the guy. I think people, I don't know what it is, and I'm guilty of it too, just think, oh, well, like now Gurley out of the picture, like Malcolm Brown is just going to be what Gurley was last year in this offense. I don't know about that, and certainly the ownership is going to be there. Now in spots, I definitely have some exposure because I think with a dynamic offense like the Rams, they have the long week. Sean McVay's track record when he either has a bye or a long week is immaculate. Time to prepare at home for an opponent. I do think that they're going to put up points, but it's not a slam dunk, plug and play Malcolm Brown.
Okay. What about the rest of this team?
Well, Cooper Kupp gets dangerous amount of targets. It's really insane right now how impressive he's been. He's priced up, but it's pretty easy to justify. He's clearly taken the lead. So I have no problem going to him. And now we look at, you've got Robert Woods kind of just there. I assume Cook's in, I want to say. So if they're pretty much playing with the full deck, they have options. And then I've mentioned Gerald Everett. It's a lot of mouths to feed, but it really does seem that kind of Cooper Kupp has taken that step as the clear top target for Goff.
Yeah, pretty much. He leads the entire league in targets, like 12.6 per game this season, which is pretty amazing. So I think there's a lot here, but I just don't know if I love this Rams team this week, and I don't know if I buy into this total. What are you thinking on the pass catchers here, Alex?
I like them. I think that the Rams may go under the radar this week as far as a game stack because Houston, Kansas City, and Atlanta, Arizona are just so great of spots at a competitive game where the Rams are projected for 27 points, may go under the radar. And I really like the fact that the offense is concentrated in three guys, Cooks, Woods, and Kupp, because that makes it really easy to stack. So I think that there's a lot of potential here.
Okay. What about the opposite side, where we're seeing this Niners team run the ball more than any other team in the league this year, 38.5 attempts per game. Breida had a huge game last week. Tevin Coleman returned and saw 16 carries for almost 100 yards. But the receivers aren't getting really anything. I mean, they've been targeted more than 5 times once all season. That was Deebo Samuel in week 2, and they had 2 receivers with 5 or more targets. That's Samuel in week 2 and Marcus Goodwin in week 4. Like, there are literally no opportunities for these receivers on a consistent basis outside of George Kittle. The emphasis has clearly been on the run. Do you think this game is close enough for them to maintain that same style of play today?
Well, I think that for fantasy value, it's really hard to play anyone from the Niners aside from George Kittle because with the running backs, they have 3 guys, Coleman, Breida, and Mostert, that are all in the mix. So splitting up the production a lot. And in addition, I saw Jeff Wilson may be active for this game, and he might vulture a touchdown if he is. On the receiving team, their rotation has been clarified a little bit. Last game we saw it's pretty much Pettis, Samuel, Goodwin, a little bit of Bourne and Richie James in the mix, but none of these guys really are individually great plays because Kittle is getting a lot of the targets. The injury situation is clouding his outlook today. But I'm willing to take some chances on him because if he is healthier than people are expecting, I think that could equal a huge fantasy game.
Okay. Ben, do you?
Yeah, I mean, Kittle's the obvious if you're stacking this game. I don't know where else you can look. As Alex just said, I mean, the running back situation is a mess. The wide receivers is, I saw your tweet and you just referenced it, Lofty. They're not getting the targets to justify it. Now, can you take Goodwin's the type of guy, he doesn't need a lot of targets, but it's such a narrow path. I do not think it's worth it to take a shot on a home run guy like that. There are other home run guys around the league I'd rather go to. So for me, if you think that Kittle can get through the game, and we've all spoke about, I think everyone is guilty of overrating what we hear pregame with some of these guys. We just don't know. He could have been this injured last, there are guys who play through things all the time. It's just a matter of, it ups the risk, but at the same time, the advantage you get from people with all the tight end pivots, it really can crater his ownership in a hurry because everyone's going to say, let me just go to Hooper. He's in a smash spot anyway. And George Kittle,
absolutely.
You know what I mean? And that ups my interest in him. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's a good point because it's really that ownership is going to get shifted to pretty obvious plays is what you're saying.
Definitely.
It's not going to be all going to Jeff Swain. You're going to see a lot go to Hooper and Andrews. You're right. Absolutely. Anything else from this one, boys, before we move on to maybe the worst game of the week?
No.
I could see taking some Garoppolo. I think that 3.3% projected ownership for him is pretty low. And they have been effective throwing the ball above 8 yards per attempt. So he makes a nice play. It's just a matter of getting lucky with who you stack him up with.
How do you feel about having a tight end in the flex spot this week, Alex?
I think it makes sense. I mean, there's some great tight end options this week, so I'd treat them basically the same as a wide receiver, like these guys like Kelce, Kittle, Hooper. Definitely not shying away from putting them in the flex.
Okay. Ben, any thoughts on that? You and I have discussed this a lot over the years, and I was actually looking at what we got this season as far as like tight ends in the flex. There were a couple weeks, I think week 2, where it might have been week 1 or 2, where like a lot of the top 100s in the Millie Maker and in the $9 slant all had tight ends, and then other weeks where there were just 0 tight ends to be found in the flex. So I think it really depends on who the player is and what week you're talking about.
Absolutely. It was pretty crazy, and I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but last week, even though the points were like 350, there was really no tight end on the main slate that got it going to the extent you would have thought. So it's a week-to-week thing. This is we've got some guys up top where I have no problem mixing and matching with a couple of them. It's a creative build. You find leverage within popular plays like that.
Right. Okay. Ben, Tennessee and Denver, barn burner and mile high.
Right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, right. 41-point implied over under. It is the lowest of any game on this entire week. Titans have a sub 20-point implied total, 21.3 for the Broncos, who are 1.5-point home favorites. I'll just let you take it away, man.
I really don't have much to say. I think that even though we have less games, this is one I can do without. You look at the Broncos side, finally got a win. Finally, now they're back at home. Maybe they can get something going here. If you want to pay for their defense, it's a mid-range type price. I have no problem with that going against Mariota. Freeman and Lindsey kind of cannibalize each other. It can be difficult. Sutton on the outside. Noah Fant is buried just with so many premier tight ends in my mind. I really don't have much to say. I have barely any exposure to this game.
Yeah, I guess the one thing for me would be, Alex, what are you doing with Phillip Lindsay?
So I picked Royce Freeman as my contrarian running back of the week this week. And I was pretty proud because I put out a poll with our 3 contrarian running backs that we came up with: Adrian Peterson, Derrick Henry, and Royce Freeman. This is, of course, the show I did with Chris Baggs yesterday and Steve Buzzard. If you want to check it out, we have a gap between 11 and 12 p.m. So make sure check that out if you're looking for more info. Royce Freeman only got 15% of the votes, so he was the most contrarian of the contrarian running back picks. And I think that Denver's running back situation this year is appealing because they're splitting in between 2 guys instead of 3 last year. Royce Freeman has been involved in both the running and receiving game, and his ownership is really, really low because he hasn't put up any good fantasy performances yet. But this is a hot hand situation, so from week to week, I think it will fluctuate who has the big game. And it could very well be Lindsey as well. I think he's projected, I have him projected higher than Freeman, but I think Freeman may be the better player for DFS.
So obviously you're not playing both in the same lineup, but do you have interest in Lindsey as well, even though you like Freeman more?
Yeah, I do. I think Lindsey is a nice play. He gets it done running the ball and receiving. Denver is a favorite in this game, so I think that there's some potential there for sure, but he isn't quite as contrarian as you might expect.
Yeah, I've been coming around a little bit more to Lindsey throughout the week, but I don't know how much I like him. I definitely want to have some, though. Do you guys, either of you, feel free to just jump in since this game doesn't have much, and we'll get to the last one here. But either of you have any interest in the Tennessee side of the ball?
I don't. I know people, Derrick Henry will get some volume, but for me, I'm not in a spot where I really think that the ceiling justifies it.
I'm not there either. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, Henry's pretty expensive. He's almost as much as Bell and Fournette. And there is one site where I'd consider him a fantasy draft where he's 11K. That is the cheapest of any of the sites, so he makes a nice play in there.
Okay. Let's close this out. And Ben, okay, I'm going to ask you, because this feels like a spot where you would say yes. Do the Jets cover this week with Sam Darnold back?
Well, they're taking, the spread open, and I know a lot of it's because Darnold is back, but it's down to a touchdown.
I know.
They are at home. I think that the Jets play just fine in this game. I know they're bad, but this is the NFL, and this is a decent spot. Now, Lev Bell, to bring it back to fantasy, is in a great spot. He's going to be very popular. He is getting all the work. Darnold being back certainly helps, keep that defense a little more honest, and he should have a ton of dump-offs regardless. So I think you can look there. I think this game has sneaky potential. Amare and Dak have been a ridiculous combo in a couple of games. Dallas needs this game. The wild card for me, I mean, he's not a wild card, but Zeke hasn't busted through just yet with a monster game. I'm not sure
at all.
If this is the spot. I have some appeal to him, but I'd be lying if I said I felt great about it. So it's a game I have interest in despite it being with the poor Jets.
Ezekiel Elliott or Alvin Kamara?
Kamara.
For me, it's Kamara, Zeke, Cook. When talking about the expensive guys, I don't have a ton of interest in Cook right now. So
right.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Alex, let me ask you about the Jets as well. Le'Veon Bell, of course, is getting a ton of attention here. His ownership is up, and of course, his volume has been ridiculous. The hope here, because you're looking at ownership, the hope here is that because he's not very expensive, you're going to see him be more efficient with Sam Darnold and not Luke Falk, and you're going to start seeing him maybe be able to average more than 0.7 yards per carry. So what are you doing with Le'Veon Bell in a spot where, like Ben mentioned earlier, he should probably see 25 plus opportunities?
I like him a lot. I have him pretty close to Leonard Fournette, but a little bit worse, which makes him a great play. And I think he's not kind of going under the radar like you would expect being on the Jets, but he's pretty cheap for the level of volume he's getting. I have him projected to get about 4.5 catches per game, and he's pretty effective when he catches it. So I think that is some nice fantasy value that doesn't require touchdowns, and he's getting a lot of rushing attempts. So I mean, these all add a lot of value. The touchdowns are the big question mark because the Jets' offense as a whole isn't that good. But if we see some positive variance on that side, then Bell could easily win the slate.
Okay, any interest in guys like Robbie Anderson or Jamison Crowder now that Darnold isn't returned to the lineup?
The guy I'm interested in more than them is Demaryius Thomas, just because he's cheaper. I have these guys all graded pretty close, Anderson being a slight favorite, but those three guys should receive a lot of the receiving work. But Thomas is the cheapest.
Okay, Ben, what about you there?
So, I mean, they're super polarizing guys. Robbie Anderson is someone that I think you can look to because he's that boom-bust type guy, and even though Darnold doesn't throw a great deep ball, just keeping that defense honest. Now, Crowder in week 1 had like 30 catches, and he didn't get the 100-yard bonus.
Yeah.
He's a PPR machine, so if you're on a site like that, I guess maybe I'm really not looking to get a ton of exposure to the Jets because, as Alex said, you're going to have to bank on maybe a touchdown or two being your guy. I don't see them scoring a bunch of points. Lev Bell can move. I wanted to ask you guys, though, specifically on DraftKings, they've changed the way their defenses are. The Jets' defense is $1,500.
It's crazy, yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I forgot to bring it up all week that they got rid of the $2,000 minimum salary.
Yeah, so there is no floor now, and that is a dynamic price in the sense that, we've seen time and time again with defense, it's very fluky. The Jets are the perfect example. They had 2 pick sixes in the Patriots game where they did absolutely nothing. Now, I'm not saying that happens today, but if you are building an extremely aggressive build, you are now going to have the option to pay all the way down with some of these defenses.
Yep, no, good point, man. Alex, what are you doing with some of these dirt cheap defenses like the New York Jets, who last I looked are projected for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ninth highest ownership among any player or any team.
Jesus.
Is he muted? Are you muted on us?
I don't know.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
I like that. I think that every site has kind of their cheap defense. On Yahoo, the one that stands out is the Broncos. They're the minimum versus Tennessee. And Jets, I mean, not a great matchup versus Dallas, but they're way cheaper than any other defense. And I had some success when that happened on FanDuel with Miami a couple weeks back. They didn't put up a big score; it was in the single digits. But because the other guys I had around them were good, I had a pretty good lineup with that. So I think we're kind of getting accustomed to seeing defenses put up 20, 30 points, but a lot of weeks the best defense may be in the low teens. So if that happens, you're going to be wishing you had the Jets.
all right. Yeah, Ben, who are your defenses here? Any really cheap ones that you like?
So I like the Jags defense this week. I think that they could cause some problems for the Saints at home. And I just want to echo what Alex just said. Again, with recency bias, I know it feels like if a defense breaks the slate and scores 25 or 30 today, if you pay down a defense, most likely you're cooked. But if they don't, the savings that you're going to get from bumping down is massive. And more often than not, I know it seems like someone's going to score 30. That's usually not the case.
Right? No, you're right. I mean, it's not. So I guess you find yourself with some intrigue then, is what you're saying.
Oh, definitely. I pay down. The Vikings, the Jaguars, those type of defenses to me are much – I would much rather play them than play Dallas in my mind.
I agree. What about them or Washington?
Well, I don't go against Kenyon Drake, but yeah, I mean, there's merit to Washington, of course.
Yeah. Well, I say, and only because the Skins defense isn't that expensive given their opponent. But yeah, I'm with you, man. What about Dallas? We talked about Zeke a little bit, Ben, but Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, Zeke, what are you doing with Dallas before we head out for the day?
Yeah, I think that you can pair up, Dak with those guys. He's shown they can get it going. Now, I think you need the Jets to cooperate a little bit to push them because they've been in catch-up mode, and that's where they've really exploded. Not sure I see that today, but at the same time, there's no doubting that the main weapons on Dallas are firmly in play in this game.
Okay. Yeah, do you feel the same way, Alex?
I'm kind of slow to catch up on Michael Gallup here because I see he's been having a terrific season, but it's a pretty small sample size. I don't think he's played every game.
No, you're right. He missed a couple.
Yeah, yep. So he only started 2 games. He's played 3 games. But he's done amazingly in them. But last year, for a whole year, he was averaging 31 yards per game, 48% catch percent. So I think that I'm a little hesitant to label him as a guy that's worthy of a mid-price salary. But I think Cooper is a great play. I think that he's been terrific in Dallas over a larger sample. He'd be someone I go to as a one-off, probably.
Okay. One of your favorite receivers?
I think so, just because, this is a great spot for Dallas, and I don't love the game stack because the Jets aren't that good a team, but there's definitely a potential for one of these guys, Elliott or Cooper or Gallup, to just have a monster game.
Okay. Ben, anything else to add here before we're out?
No, I think that sums it up with this game and with the slate in general.
All right. And we've got plenty of shows coming up, and we hope you stick around for them. So what we've got today, the NFL Live Before Lock, presented by Fantasydraft. That's Josh Engelman and Chris Spags. And then Manny Laura and myself will be on SiriusXM Fantasy wrapping everything up. If you're driving home, you want to check it out, you're sitting here after the after the 4 p.m. games and want to get a full breakdown and a preview for the night game, here it is, Sirius 210 XM87, Awesome Fantasy Football Game Day from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And then NFL Live Before Lock, it is Eric, Emac, and Eric and Emac. I can't pronounce Eric's last name. I promise I'll get that one. But they're going to break down Sunday Night Football game and get you ready for these Monster Showdown prize pools. So that'll do it for us. Alex, what do you have? Anything else before we get out for the day?
Yeah, thanks for everyone for watching. Make sure before lock, you got some time to catch up on content. So we got strategy shows every day covering different topics. We did some great ones on Fantasy Cruncher and how to use that this week, among many other topics. So make sure to check that out and check out the tools on the site. I think I spend a lot of time making sure that my game is up to par with all the top players because I'm putting a lot of money down every week, and I don't want to lose my money. So take advantage of this information I'm putting out there, and you can play on the same level as me.
All right. Well, that will do it for us. Thanks for tuning in. As always, before you head out, if you like the show, you want to help support us so we can continue to put free content out here on YouTube. Hit us with a thumbs up, like the video, and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always know when new content's going to drop next. 12 o'clock p.m. leading you up to lock. It is NFL Live Before Lock with Josh Engelman and Chris Baggs. I will see you back here with Ben and Alex next Sunday on the NFL Deeper Dive. Peace.